The music room was quiet that morning, sunlight slipping through the half-open blinds and resting on the old piano. Students filled the room with chatter and laughter, waiting for the music teacher to arrive. Among them was Ethan, the most confident boy in class. He was known for his perfect piano skills and his arrogant smile. He believed no one could ever play better than him. When the door opened, everyone turned their heads. A new girl walked in. Her steps were soft, her eyes gentle. She held a small notebook close to her chest. Her name was Lena. She looked different. Calm, shy, almost fragile, the teacher introduced her, saying she had transferred from another school. She would join the music program. Ethan noticed the small device behind her ear. A hearing aid, he whispered to his friend, and they both smirked. The teacher smiled kindly and said, "Lena, you can take a seat near the piano." She nodded politely. Moving to the corner, she did not speak. She only wrote something quickly in her notebook. The class began. Ethan played a few tunes on the piano, showing off as always. His fingers moved smoothly over the keys. The students clapped. He turned to Lena and grinned. "Can you play?" he asked in a teasing tone. Lena looked at him, then at the piano. She opened her notebook and wrote something. She turned it toward him. It said, "I can try." Ethan raised his eyebrows. "Try?" He laughed. "But you can't even hear the notes, right?" The class laughed with him. Lena's hands tightened on her notebook. Her face turned pale, but she didn't respond. She just sat down quietly. Ethan didn't stop. He said louder, "Music is about listening. How can someone who can't hear play anything good?" The students around him giggled again. The teacher frowned, but before she could say anything, Lena stood up. She walked slowly to the piano. She sat down. Her small fingers hovered above the keys. Everyone went silent. Lena touched the piano gently, pressing one key at a time. Her eyes closed as if she was listening with her heart. She played a short melody, soft, uneven, but full of feeling. The sound wasn't perfect, yet something in it made the room quiet. It was fragile but beautiful. She finished and stood up. The class didn't know whether to laugh or clap. Then she picked up her notebook again. She wrote a few words and held it up. It said, "Music is not only for ears, it's for the heart." The room stayed silent. Ethan blinked, not sure what to say, for a moment. He felt something strange inside him, a mix of guilt and curiosity, but he quickly covered it with a smirk. "That's cute," he said, pretending not to care. The bell rang. Students rushed out laughing and whispering. Lena quietly packed her bag. She moved slowly as if afraid to draw more attention. Ethan glanced at her one last time before leaving. Part of him wanted to apologize, but his pride stopped him. After everyone left, Lena stayed behind. She walked to the piano again, touched it softly, feeling the vibration of each key under her fingers. She smiled faintly. She didn't need their approval. She didn't need to hear the sound because she could feel it. Deep inside, from outside the door, Ethan paused for a moment, hearing faint notes through the hallway. He turned back and saw her still playing. Her eyes closed, her lips moving as if humming silently. For the first time, Ethan didn't feel like laughing. He felt confused. How could someone who couldn't hear play with such emotion? He didn't understand it, but something about her stayed in his mind. Later that evening, when he was home practicing his piano, her words echoed in his head. "Music is not only for ears, it's for the heart." He tried to ignore them, but he couldn't. He played the same melody she had played, and even though it was simple, it touched something inside him. At the same time, Lena sat in her small room. Surrounded by notebooks filled with song notes and sketches, she placed her hand on her chest, feeling the rhythm of her heartbeat. That was her music, the only sound she truly needed. She promised herself that one day she would make the world hear her. Even if she could not hear it back and far away, Ethan kept practicing, unaware that the girl he mocked today would soon become the person who would teach him what true music really meant. The day had started with laughter and pride, but it ended with silence and wonder. Neither of them knew it yet, but this small moment, one girl's courage and one boy's arrogance, would soon turn into something extraordinary, something that would change both of their lives forever. After that embarrassing day in class, Lena stopped talking to anyone. She came to school quietly, sat in the back and left without a word, but every afternoon, when the hallways became empty and the echoes of laughter faded, she would return to the music room, the same place where everyone had mocked her. She sat at the old piano, the one with faded keys and scratches on its wooden frame, and placed her small hands on it. The moment her fingers touched the keys, she could feel the soft tremble. the vibration that ran up her fingertips and into her chest. She didn't need sound. She could feel music. She played slowly, pressing one key then another, eyes closed, memorizing how each vibration felt sometimes. She placed her palm flat across the top of the piano, letting the deep tones hum through her skin. It was like the piano was talking to her in a secret language, a language no one else could understand. In those moments, Lena felt free. She felt powerful. The world without sound didn't matter anymore. But she didn't know that she wasn't alone. Ethan had noticed her coming back after class. At first, he didn't care. Maybe he just wanted to see if she would embarrass herself again. But the second time he passed by the music room, he stopped. He saw her sitting there, playing softly with her eyes closed, her face peaceful. The way she moved her hands was different. Not like someone practicing notes, but like someone trying to speak through the piano. He leaned against the wall, hiding from her sight, listening. Her music wasn't perfect, but it was full of emotion. Ethan couldn't understand how she did it. He had learned piano through years of lessons and competitions, but what she played felt alive. The next day, he told his best friend Mark, "That girl, Lena, she's still practicing. Even though she's deaf," Mark laughed. "Maybe she's pretending." "Bro," but Ethan shook his head. "No, she's different," he said quietly, not sure why he was defending her. That evening, Ethan walked back to the music room again. The lights were dim and Lena was there alone, playing with her eyes closed. She didn't notice him at first. He walked closer, then the wooden floor creaked. She turned sharply, surprised, her eyes wide. Ethan raised his hands and said quickly, "I didn't mean to scare you." He pointed at her notebook and made a writing gesture. Lena hesitated, then slowly slid her notebook toward him. He picked up the pen and wrote, "Why are you here?" She looked at his face carefully. He wrote again, "You play really good." She blinked, unsure if he was mocking her again. She shook her head and looked away, but Ethan didn't leave. He pointed at the piano and then at her hands. "Teach me?" he wrote. Lena frowned in confusion. She took the pen and wrote back, "You already know how to play. You're the best." Ethan smiled faintly. "Maybe, but I don't play like you," he replied. For a moment, she stared at the words. Unsure if he was serious the next few days, Ethan kept showing up after class, sometimes just sitting quietly, watching her play, other times trying to communicate through notes. One afternoon, he brought a small wooden box. It was a metronome. He wound it up and placed it on the piano. Its steady tick-tock motion began. Lena watched it curiously, then placed her fingers on the piano keys, matching her rhythm to the silent movement. Ethan smiled, seeing her follow it perfectly. "Now you can feel the beat," he wrote. She nodded and smiled faintly. The first smile he had seen from her. It wasn't big, but it was real. Days passed, and the silence between them slowly turned into comfort. They didn't need many words. Sometimes Ethan would play a melody, and Lena would follow, turning it into something softer, gentler. Other times she would write something like "too fast" or "more feeling," and he would laugh. Trying again one afternoon, rain poured heavily outside, the sound of thunder shaking the windows. Lena was late. Ethan waited, tapping his fingers on the piano. When she finally entered, soaked and shivering, she smiled apologetically, holding her notebook close. He handed her a towel. She laughed silently. Mouthing a small thank you, they sat together. And she began to play again, but this time Ethan didn't join in. He just watched, really watched, her eyes closed, her fingers trembling slightly, her expression full of emotion. He realized she wasn't playing notes, and she was telling a story, her story through every key. When she finished, he wrote quickly, "How do you do that?" "You can't hear it, but you play like you feel every sound." She looked at the page, then placed her hand over her heart and wrote, "I hear it here." Pointing to her chest, Ethan stared at the words, his chest tightening for the first time. He didn't feel like laughing or showing off. He felt small and inspired. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. Her music haunted him, her calmness, her strength. It was something he had never seen before. He used to think music was about sound, about winning competitions, but now for the first time, he understood that music could also be felt. From that day on, Ethan never mocked her again. He came to the music room every day not to teach, but to learn, from the deaf girl who could play the piano better than anyone who could hear. Without either of them realizing, something began to grow between them, something quiet, like a note only two hearts could hear, something that sounded a lot like love. Days passed like soft pages turning, and the quiet friendship between Ethan and Lena began to grow in a way neither of them expected. It wasn't built on words but on glances, notes on paper, and the silent rhythm of two people learning to understand each other without sound. Every afternoon when the last bell rang and students rushed home, Ethan would stay behind, pretending to practice. Waiting for her to appear, she always did, like clockwork, stepping softly into the music room, her notebook in one hand, her small smile the only greeting she needed. At first, Lena didn't trust him completely. She still remembered the way he had laughed at her that first day. But he had changed, she could see it in his eyes. They weren't mocking anymore. They were curious. Warm, almost gentle, she could feel the difference. Ethan, on the other hand, found himself looking forward to those quiet afternoons more than anything else. The silence didn't bother him anymore. In fact, it felt peaceful. He didn't have to talk or impress anyone. He just had to be there, sitting beside her while she played. One day, as she was practicing a slow, emotional tune, Ethan noticed her struggling with the timing. He leaned closer and softly tapped his fingers on the piano lid. Keeping a steady rhythm, Lena looked up, then smiled. She could feel the vibration of his tapping through the wood. She followed it perfectly, their movements syncing in harmony when they finished. She wrote quickly in her notebook, "Thank you." "That helped?" Ethan smiled and replied, "You don't need my help." "You're already amazing," she read it, blushed slightly and shook her head, writing, "No one is amazing alone." The next day, Ethan came to the music room holding something small wrapped in a cloth. He placed it gently in front of her. She opened it to find a small golden metronome. Newer than the old wooden one she'd been using, it gleamed softly under the light. Her eyes widened. She looked up at him with surprise. He scribbled on the notebook, "I thought you could use this. It's easier to feel the beat." Lena touched it carefully, then wrote back, "It's beautiful, thank you." She paused for a moment, then added another line, "Why are you being nice to me?" Ethan hesitated before writing, "Because I was wrong about you." She looked at him, trying to read his face, and for the first time, he didn't look away. From that day on, their practice sessions became more like shared stories. Ethan would teach her new chords, drawing simple diagrams on paper, and Lena would close her eyes and try to hear them through touch. Sometimes she got them right immediately. Sometimes she laughed silently when she missed. He found her laughter addicting, a soundless joy that somehow filled the whole room. Once, Ethan asked her to teach him how she felt vibrations. She guided his hands, placing them flat on the piano surface. His eyes widened as he felt the soft hum travel through his skin. "That's what you hear?" he wrote. She nodded, smiling. "Now you understand." They started leaving small notes for each other on the piano when one of them came in early or left late. Messages like, "Good job today, try this chord tomorrow," or "Don't give up." Sometimes even a small doodle of a piano or a smiley face. The music room began to feel like their secret world, hidden from everyone else. One afternoon, Ethan came in with a silly grin. He had brought his phone and opened a piano tutorial video. He pointed to it, showing her a popular song. "Let's play this together," he wrote. She looked at the screen, then at him, shaking her head playfully. "Too hard," she wrote. He laughed. "Not for you." They practiced for hours, the melody slowly coming together. Sometimes he played the right keys, sometimes she did, and when they finally got it perfect, they high-fived, laughing silently. It was the first time Ethan realized he hadn't checked his phone once. Hadn't cared about messages or calls, just this moment. This girl and this music. Rain began to fall outside again, tapping softly against the window. Lena looked out and smiled. She loved the rhythm of the rain. She could feel it even from here. Ethan noticed her gaze and wrote, "Do you like the rain?" She nodded. "It's like music that doesn't need sound," she replied. Something about that line stuck with him. He found himself staring at her longer than before. Her calm face, her quiet confidence, the way her fingers rested lightly on the piano keys like she was born to play them. His heart beat faster. He didn't know what this feeling was yet, but it scared him a little. Then came the moment that changed everything. As they finished playing a duet, Lena reached for a high note but missed it. She frowned. Ethan laughed, reaching over to press it for her. Their hands brushed just for a second, but both of them froze. The world seemed to pause with them. Lena looked up at him, her eyes soft, curious. Something unspoken passed between them, something tender and fragile. He quickly looked away, pretending to adjust the sheet music, his cheeks warm. She smiled faintly, wrote one simple line in her notebook and pushed it toward him. It said, "You don't need to speak to be kind." Ethan read it again and again, the words sinking deep into his chest. When Lena left that evening, he stayed behind, sitting at the piano, staring at the keys she had touched. He tried to play her melody again, but somehow it didn't sound the same without her there. Outside, the rain kept falling, the sound mixing with the faint echo of the piano. And in that quiet room, Ethan realized that somewhere between the silence and the music, something beautiful had begun, something he didn't understand yet, but something he didn't want to lose. The notice board outside the music room was crowded that morning. Students gathered around it, whispering excitedly. The big red letters read, "Annual School Music Competition. Winner performs at the City Concert Hall." It was the biggest event of the year, the one every music student dreamed of. Trophies, scholarships, and recognition. It was everything Ethan had always wanted. He stood in front of the board, grinning confidently. His name was already on the list of participants, but then, a few minutes later, he noticed another name being added by trembling hands. The chalk letters curved softly. Lena. For a moment, the hallway fell quiet, then came the laughter. "Wait, Lena? The deaf girl?" Someone whispered. "She's joining this competition?" Another said, "Maybe she'll play air piano." The cruel giggles spread like ripples in water. Ethan's stomach twisted. He looked over and saw Lena standing there, clutching her notebook. Her face calm, but her hands shaking slightly. He wanted to tell them to stop, but the words stuck in his throat. Lena didn't look at anyone. She simply turned, wrote something quickly on her notebook, and walked away. Ethan followed her with his eyes, something heavy forming in his chest. That afternoon, he found her in the music room again, sitting at the piano with her notebook beside her. She was staring at the keys, not playing yet, her eyes distant. He approached quietly and tapped the edge of the piano. She looked up, surprised. He pointed at the notebook and wrote, "You signed up for the competition?" She nodded slowly, then wrote back, "Yes, I want to play on the big stage." Ethan frowned slightly. "They'll laugh again," he scribbled. But she shook her head, her eyes steady. "They laughed before. It doesn't matter." "I'm not doing it for them," she replied. For a long moment, Ethan didn't know what to say. He looked at her, small, fragile, but filled with a quiet determination that made his chest ache. He sighed and wrote, "Then I'll help you." She blinked. "Why?" she wrote. He smiled faintly. "Because I believe in you now." From that day, their practices changed. They no longer just played for fun. They trained. Ethan took on the role of her silent coach, writing down lessons, guiding her hand positions, tapping rhythms, and watching her memorize every detail. Lena was unstoppable. She practiced for hours, sometimes until her fingers turned red. She didn't complain once. She began feeling the piano differently. She could sense the low notes vibrating through the floor, the higher ones fluttering like butterflies against her fingertips. She learned to count beats using her heartbeat and the small golden metronome Ethan had given her. At first her melodies were shaky, unsure, but slowly, something magical began to happen. Her playing became alive, emotional. Deep, honest, Ethan would sit beside her, completely mesmerized, sometimes forgetting to breathe one evening. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the room golden, she finished a song and looked at him expectantly. He quickly wrote, "That was perfect." She shook her head. "Not perfect. It needs heart," he chuckled. "You already play with heart." She smiled softly. "Not enough. I want people to feel what I feel." Ethan stared at her, realizing that while everyone else wanted to win, Lena just wanted to connect. Days turned into weeks, and soon, the music room became their second home. Scattered papers, coffee cups, and half-written notes covered the piano top. They laughed together through their mistakes. Sometimes he'd tease her with silly doodles, and she'd respond with exaggerated eye rolls. But beneath it all, a silent warmth grew stronger. One night, the janitor came to lock up and found them still there. Lena was sitting at the piano while Ethan leaned against it, both exhausted but smiling. The janitor shook his head with a grin. "You two must really love music," he said. Ethan nodded without thinking. "Yeah, I guess we do." As the competition date drew closer, whispers around school continued. Some people mocked Lena openly, calling her brave in that fake, sarcastic way. Others just pitied her. Ethan hated it. One day, he overheard two boys making jokes about her, and for the first time he lost his cool. He slammed his locker shut and said sharply, "You don't know anything about her, so shut up." The hallway went silent. The boys stared, stunned. Lena heard about it later from another student. When Ethan came to practice, she wrote, "You stood up for me." He shrugged, pretending it was nothing. They were being idiots, she smiled. Her eyes soft, she wrote one simple line, "Thank you." The night before the competition, Lena couldn't sleep. She sat by the window of her small room, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. She placed her hand on her chest, feeling her heart beat. That was her metronome now, steady and strong. She whispered softly to herself, even though she couldn't hear her own voice. "Tomorrow, I'll show them what silence sounds like." Meanwhile, Ethan sat at his piano too, but he couldn't focus. Every melody he played reminded him of her. He didn't know why he felt nervous. Maybe because he wanted her to succeed more than he wanted to win himself. The next morning, the school auditorium buzzed with excitement. Students tuning instruments, teachers arranging seats, the air thick with tension. Ethan arrived early, wearing his crisp shirt, confident as ever, but his eyes searched only for one person, Lena. When she finally arrived, dressed in a simple white dress, her hair tied back neatly, everyone turned to stare. She didn't flinch. She walked straight to the piano, her notebook clutched in one hand, and gave Ethan a small, brave smile. He smiled back, trying to hide the lump in his throat. As the lights dimmed and the announcer called her name, Ethan whispered to himself, "You've got this." She took a deep breath, placed her hands on the piano, and the entire hall went silent. And in that heavy silence, the deaf girl prepared to show the world that music isn't only heard, it's felt. The day after the competition announcement, the atmosphere between Ethan and Lena changed, not in a loud or obvious way, but in a quiet, invisible one. Something was growing there, something that didn't need words. Their daily practice continued, but now it felt different. They weren't just teacher and student anymore. They were partners in rhythm. Their connection deepened with every shared glance, every silent laugh, every soft vibration of the piano that only they understood. After school, the music room became their world. The old fluorescent lights flickered gently above them, dust motes floated through golden afternoon sunlight, and the soft tapping of keys filled the air. Ethan would play a tune, then stop, watching her hands trace the same notes with flawless memory. She didn't copy him. She felt him. Every movement, every pause, every emotion. One evening, Lena placed her hand over the top of the piano while Ethan played. Her eyes closed, her breathing calm. Ethan glanced at her, the way she leaned closer, the way the light brushed her face. It was mesmerizing. His fingers slowed, the melody softening. When he stopped, she opened her eyes and smiled. She wrote on her notebook, "You were thinking about something else." He laughed, embarrassed. "Maybe," he wrote back. She tilted her head playfully. "Something or someone," she scribbled. His heart skipped. He quickly wrote, "Just music." But she caught the small smirk on his face and smiled knowingly. From that day, their teasing became a game. Ethan would deliberately play fast or out of rhythm, and Lena would tap his hand lightly. Her way of saying focus. Sometimes she'd write silly notes like, "You play like you're in a hurry to go home," and he'd respond, "Maybe I want to stay here longer." Their laughter filled the quiet corners of the room, soft but real. One afternoon it rained again, heavy and endless, thunder echoing outside as lightning flashed through the windows. Lena arrived soaked, her hair dripping, her notebook damp. Ethan rushed to hand her a towel. "You didn't have to come," he wrote. She smiled and scribbled. "Music doesn't stop for rain." She sat at the piano, pressing a few keys, but the notes were drowned out by the storm. She frowned, frustrated. Ethan thought for a moment, then turned off the lights. The room fell into darkness except for the flashes of lightning outside. Lena looked at him surprised. He gestured toward the piano and mouthed, "Play." She hesitated, then placed her fingers on the keys and began to play, softly, slowly, with only the feel of the vibrations to guide her. The thunder rolled like a drum behind her. The lightning lit up her face. Ethan watched in awe. She was glowing, not from light but from pure emotion. He joined her quietly, playing along, their hands moving in perfect coordination. In the dark, sound didn't matter, only feeling did. They created a melody that mixed with the rain, raw and beautiful. When the final note faded, Lena looked at him, her eyes glistening. She wrote in the dim light, "That felt alive." He nodded, unable to write back for a moment, his chest too tight. Finally, he scribbled, "That's what music is. You made it real." The storm ended that night, but something else began. an unspoken tenderness between them as competition day drew closer. Ethan started worrying more than he admitted. He wanted Lena to succeed, but part of him also feared she'd get hurt, not from losing, but from the cruelty of others. He knew how people could be, how they'd laugh if she stumbled, how they'd twist her courage into pity one afternoon while Lena practiced. He stopped her mid-song and wrote, "Are you scared?" She looked at the paper for a long time, then slowly wrote back, "I used to be. Not anymore," she smiled softly. "When I play, I don't hear what they say. I only feel what I love." Ethan read that twice. His throat tight, he wanted to say something, but words seemed too small, so instead he reached over and tapped the piano lid twice. Their secret way of saying "I understand." She smiled, tapping it back once. "I know." A few days later, Ethan walked into the music room carrying a surprise. A small silver chain with a tiny charm shaped like a piano key. He placed it on the piano silently. She looked at it, eyes wide, then at him. He wrote quickly, "A good luck charm. For the stage." She picked it up gently, her fingers trembling slightly, then wrote back, "I'll wear it when I play." And she did. She fastened it around her wrist, the charm catching the light as she pressed the keys. Their final practice before the competition was their most powerful one yet. Ethan played alongside her, watching as she poured her entire soul into the music. No fear, no hesitation, only emotion. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, it was alive. When they finished, neither spoke. The silence was heavy with meaning. Lena finally wrote, "When I play tomorrow, I want you to be there." He nodded instantly. "I will. Front row." She hesitated, then wrote one more thing. "Ethan, thank you for listening to my silence." He stared at the words. Unable to reply, he simply smiled and placed his hand over hers. Just for a second, and for that small moment. There were no differences between them, no sound, no silence, just two hearts that spoke the same language. The language of music. That night when Ethan went home, he lay awake staring at the ceiling, her words echoing in his mind. "Thank you for listening to my silence." He realized he wasn't just helping her anymore. She had changed him too. And as rain began to fall again outside his window, he smiled softly because he finally understood, sometimes, the most beautiful music isn't heard with the ears at all. It's felt in the quiet spaces between two beating hearts. The morning of the competition arrived with a strange stillness in the air. The sky hung low with pale clouds as if the world itself was holding its breath. Lena stood in front of her small mirror, fixing the silver piano charm around her wrist. Her hands trembled, but her eyes were calm. She couldn't hear the noise outside, her world was still and silent. But inside her chest, her heartbeat drummed like music, steady and strong. At school, the auditorium buzzed with nervous energy, the sound of instruments tuning, shoes tapping, and whispers filling the space. Ethan stood near the stage, dressed neatly in his performance suit, his fingers tapping restlessly against his side. He had performed in competitions before, but never had he felt this anxious. He wasn't nervous for himself, he was nervous for her. When Lena arrived, everyone turned to stare. She wore a simple white dress that flowed softly around her, her hair tied neatly, her notebook tucked under one arm, her expression unreadable. Ethan walked toward her and mouthed, "You ready?" She smiled faintly and nodded, then pointed at his chest. "You too," she mouthed back. The competition began one by one. Students took the stage, violins, guitars, and pianos filled the hall. Some performances were beautiful, others stiff. The judges nodded politely. Jotting down notes, Ethan's turn came before Lena's. He took a deep breath, sat at the grand piano and began to play. His fingers moved flawlessly, every note perfect, every rhythm sharp. The audience clapped loudly when he finished, but as he bowed, his eyes searched only for her. She was standing backstage, clutching her charm, her lips whispering a silent count. 1, 2, 3, the way she always timed her heartbeats before starting. Ethan walked past her after his performance, whispering softly, "You've got this," she nodded, her eyes glowing with determination. Then came her name. Lena Hart, solo piano performance. The words echoed through the hall. The crowd fell into a curious hush. Ethan sat in the front row, his palms sweating as she walked slowly onto the stage, the spotlight bathing her in warm gold. She looked so small and fragile under it, yet there was something powerful in the way she held herself. She sat down at the piano, touched the keys softly, and closed her eyes for a few seconds. There was silence, the kind that made people uneasy. Then, with the faintest motion, she began to play. The first note was soft, almost like a whisper. The second trembled, The third grew stronger, and then the melody unfolded, more deep, emotional, and hauntingly beautiful. She wasn't playing the piano, she was telling a story. The audience leaned in, unable to look away. Her fingers danced across the keys, light and graceful, her face calm but full of feeling. She couldn't hear the music, but everyone else could feel it. It was as if her heart was speaking through every vibration. Ethan's throat tightened. He knew this song. It was the one she had practiced for weeks. The one she said came from her mother's lullaby. The last thing she ever remembered hearing before losing her hearing. Halfway through, a small mistake happened. Her finger slipped. A note slightly off. A murmur ran through the audience. Ethan's stomach clenched, but Lena didn't stop. She smiled softly to herself, pressed her hand flat on the piano for a second, feeling the vibration, and continued, stronger than before. The melody rose like a wave, gentle yet powerful. And when she reached the final part, she added something new. A change in rhythm. A twist Ethan had never heard before. It was pure emotion. A mix of sadness and hope. It was her when the last note faded. The room stayed silent, no one moved, no one breathed. And then suddenly the hall erupted in applause. Loud and long, people stood up, clapping and cheering, some wiping tears from their eyes. Lena looked up, surprised, blinking under the lights. Her lips parted in disbelief. Ethan stood too, clapping the loudest, his heart pounding. She looked at him and smiled. That small, quiet smile that said everything without needing sound. The judges whispered among themselves, nodding with admiration. The head judge finally stood and said, "That was extraordinary," even though Lena couldn't hear him. She could see the warmth in his expression. She bowed gracefully, clutching her notebook close. Backstage, Ethan rushed to her, unable to hide his excitement. He grabbed her notebook and wrote quickly. "You were incredible." She read it and shook her head. "I made a mistake," she wrote. He laughed. No one noticed. They were too busy crying. She giggled silently, her shoulders relaxing for the first time all day. Then something unexpected happened. One of the judges came backstage, an older woman with kind eyes. She tapped Lena's shoulder and handed her a card. "You must perform again," she said gently, "at the city concert. Next month." Lena blinked in shock, her hands trembling. She turned to Ethan, who quickly wrote, "They want you at the city concert." Her eyes widened, then filled with tears. She covered her mouth, laughing silently. Ethan grinned, his chest full of pride. "You did it," he wrote. She took the notebook from his hands and scribbled fast. "We did it," she pointed at him and smiled. Later that night, after everyone left, they found themselves alone again in the music room. The same one where it all began. Lena sat at the piano, tracing the keys with her fingers. Ethan leaned beside her, watching quietly. She wrote in her notebook, "When I was little, my mom told me that music would always find me, even if I couldn't hear it anymore." Ethan read it, his chest aching with emotion. He wrote, "She was right," Lena smiled. "Yes, it found me." "Through you." He froze, staring at the words. She looked up, her eyes shining softly in the dim light, and for a moment, they just stayed like that. Two people connected by something beyond sound. Beyond words. Outside, the rain began to fall again, tapping lightly against the windows. Lena placed her palm on the piano, then on her chest, feeling the vibration of her own heartbeat. She whispered something Ethan couldn't hear, but he could read her lips. "Thank you." And as he watched her play again under the soft flicker of the lights, Ethan finally understood. She didn't just teach him how to play with emotion, she taught him how to feel in silence, how to listen without hearing, and how love could sound louder than any note ever played. The night after the competition, the world felt different for both of them. The auditorium was empty now, the lights were off, but the echo of Lena's music still lingered like a ghost in the walls. Ethan couldn't sleep. He kept hearing the melody she played. That haunting, beautiful tune that made everyone cry. He replayed it in his mind over and over again, wondering how someone who couldn't hear could create something so full of emotion. The next morning, the news spread through the school like wildfire. "The deaf girl won," students whispered in disbelief. Some were amazed, others skeptical. But one thing was certain. No one was laughing anymore. Lena had done what no one thought possible. She had silenced her critics with silence itself. When Lena entered the hallway that morning, people stepped aside, watching her with awe and a bit of shame. A few clapped softly, and though she couldn't hear it, she could see their faces, respect replacing mockery. She smiled politely, clutching her notebook. Her charm bracelet glinting under the lights. Ethan caught up to her near the lockers. His face bright, he wrote on his small pad. "You're famous now," she laughed silently. shaking her head, and wrote back, "I don't want to be famous. I just want to play." He smiled at that. "You'll be playing at the city concert soon," he reminded her. She nodded, her eyes glowing with quiet pride. A few days later, reporters came to school, their cameras flashing as they tried to capture the miracle girl who played piano without hearing. Ethan stayed beside her the whole time, helping her communicate. One of the reporters leaned in and asked loudly, "How did you learn to play if you can't hear anything?" Lena smiled, pulled out her notebook, and wrote a single sentence. "Music isn't something you hear, it's something you feel." The reporter looked stunned, but then pressed, "Still, there must be a secret, right? How can you play so perfectly?" Lena hesitated, her fingers trembling slightly on the page. Ethan noticed her silence. He touched her shoulder gently. "You don't have to answer," he mouthed, but she shook her head. She wanted to tell the truth. She took a deep breath and began to write slowly. "When I was 6, I lost my hearing in an accident," she wrote. "But before that, I could hear one song, my mother's lullaby. It was the last sound I ever heard." The room went still, the cameras clicked, but no one spoke. Lena continued writing, her expression calm but her eyes glassy. "When I play, I don't hear it, but I remember how it felt when my mother sang it to me. That memory is my music." Ethan's throat tightened as he read the words. Suddenly, everything made sense. The melody she played during the competition wasn't just a song. It was her memory, her last connection to sound, to love, to her mother. The reporter leaned closer, whispering softly, "That's beautiful." Lena smiled faintly and wrote one last line. "It's not beautiful, it's my way of hearing again." After the interview, Ethan followed her out of the room. She looked pale, drained. He wrote, "You didn't have to share that," she smiled weakly. "It's okay. Maybe someone out there needs to hear it, even if I can't." They walked together in silence down the hallway, the kind of silence that felt heavy but meaningful. When they reached the music room, Lena sat at the piano. Her fingers hovering above the keys, she began playing softly, the same lullaby she had described, slow and fragile. Ethan closed his eyes, imagining a mother humming it to a little girl. When she finished, she looked up and tears shimmered in Ethan's eyes. She reached for her notebook. "You can hear it," she wrote. "So promise me you'll remember it even when I can't." He nodded. Unable to speak, he took her hand gently, squeezing it, and for that moment, no words were needed. As the days passed, the city concert drew closer. Posters went up with her name, Lena Hart, the girl who plays from the heart. People from all over planned to attend. Reporters, musicians, even a few producers. Ethan practiced with her every evening. Though he wasn't performing, he wanted her to be ready for anything. One night after practice, as they packed up, he noticed her staring at the window, lost in thought. "What are you thinking?" He wrote. She replied, "About my mom." She paused, then added, "She always told me one day someone would listen to my silence." "I think she meant you." Ethan froze, the air between them thick and quiet. She smiled softly, her eyes glowing with something gentle but deep. He wanted to tell her how he felt, that she had changed him, that she had made him hear life differently. But before he could write anything, she waved goodnight and walked away, leaving him standing there, heart pounding. That night, Ethan sat at his piano but didn't play. He just placed his hand on the keys, feeling the vibrations the way she did. It wasn't the same, but it was enough to remind him of her. He smiled faintly, whispering into the empty room, "You're amazing, Lena." Meanwhile, Lena sat by her window, the city lights flickering below. She took off her charm bracelet and placed it on her desk, watching it sparkle. She touched her chest and whispered into the silence, "Thank you, Mom." He listens. The next morning, the school principal announced that Lena's story would be featured on television before her city concert performance. Students cheered, teachers clapped. Ethan caught her eye and smiled proudly. But beneath his joy, a quiet worry grew. Fame could be cruel, and the world didn't always understand delicate hearts like hers. Still, as he watched her walk down the hall, confident, graceful, her fingers brushing the charm on her wrist, he realized that no matter what happened, she had already won something far greater than a trophy. She had turned her silence into a song and her pain into beauty. And for Ethan, that was more powerful than any music he had ever heard. And deep inside, he knew that when she stepped on that grand city stage, she wouldn't just be playing for the crowd. She'd be playing for her mother, for her younger self, and for the boy who once mocked her. The boy who now couldn't imagine a world without her. The night of the city concert arrived like a dream painted in gold. The grand hall shimmered with light. Crystal chandeliers glowed softly above hundreds of people dressed in elegance. The air buzzed with excitement, anticipation, and whispers of the girl who had captured everyone's heart. The deaf pianist who played from her soul. Backstage, Lena stood in her white gown, the silver piano charm glinting around her wrist. Her heart pounded like a quiet drum inside her chest. She couldn't hear the crowd, but she could feel the vibration of their presence. It was strong, alive like a sea of energy flowing through the floor. She closed her eyes, breathing deeply, feeling the rhythm of her own heartbeat align with the world. Ethan was there too, dressed in a black suit, standing by her side, trying to look calm but failing miserably. His hands fidgeted, his throat dry. He had performed before many times, but tonight felt different. It wasn't about him. It was about her, the girl who turned silence into melody. He handed her the small notebook she always carried. She smiled and quickly scribbled, "Are you nervous?" He shook his head with a grin, then wrote, "I should ask you that." She laughed silently, her shoulders relaxing a little. "I'm not nervous anymore," she wrote. "When I play, I'm home." The stage manager signaled her turn. The crowd hushed as her name was announced. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Lena Hart." Ethan squeezed her hand once, their silent promise, and whispered, "You've got this," even though she couldn't hear. She understood every word in his eyes. She stepped forward, her white dress gliding across the stage floor like a cloud. The audience leaned in as she sat before the grand piano, its polished surface shining like glass under the lights. For a brief moment, everything stood still. No sound, no movement, just a girl and a piano in perfect silence. Lena placed her hands on the keys. Feeling the cool surface beneath her fingertips, she closed her eyes, remembering her mother's voice, Ethan's smile, and every vibration she had ever felt. Then she began to play. The first notes floated through the hall like whispers, soft and tender. The melody was new. Not the lullaby from the competition, but something she had written herself, a story in sound, built from everything she had lived through. The pain, the laughter, the loneliness, and the love. The crowd sat frozen, mesmerized, as her fingers danced across the keys, sometimes gentle like falling rain, sometimes fierce like a storm breaking through clouds. She wasn't following sheet music, she was following her heart, and every note carried a piece of her soul. Ethan watched from the wings, his chest tightening with pride and awe. He had heard her play dozens of times, but this was different. This was Lena, pure, unfiltered, and free. He could almost feel her emotions in the air, wrapping around everyone like invisible threads, connecting hearts through silence. Halfway through, she paused for a heartbeat, eyes closed, her hand resting gently on the piano. The crowd held its breath. Then she lifted her fingers again, playing a soft, delicate bridge, the same melody her mother had once sung, woven into the new song like a hidden secret. Ethan felt a lump rise in his throat. She finished with a slow, trembling note that lingered in the air, fading into stillness for one long moment. There was nothing, no applause, no movement, just silence. Pure and complete, and then suddenly the hall erupted. Applause thundered like waves crashing. People stood to their feet, cheering, clapping, crying. Lena blinked, looking up in surprise. She couldn't hear their cheers, but she could see them. Hundreds of people on their feet, hands moving wildly, faces glowing. She felt the vibration under her fingertips, the echo through the floor, and for her that was enough. Tears filled her eyes as she smiled and bowed deeply. Ethan rushed to her as she stepped off the stage, his face bright with joy. He grabbed her notebook and wrote fast, "Lena, that was beyond perfect. You didn't just play, you spoke to everyone." She read it, tears spilling down her cheeks, then wrote, "I wasn't speaking to everyone." She looked up at him, her gaze soft. "I was speaking to you." He froze, staring at her, his heart pounding in his chest. She smiled shyly, then added, "You're the reason I kept playing." "Ethan, you heard me when no one else did." He wanted to speak, to tell her everything he'd been holding back, how she'd changed him, how her silence had taught him to listen. But instead, he simply reached out, taking her hand gently, his fingers brushing over the charm on her wrist. They walked together out into the empty hallway behind the stage, the sound of distant applause fading. Outside, the night was cool and quiet, stars scattered like notes across the dark sky. Lena tilted her head back, watching them, the silver charm on her wrist catching the starlight. Ethan pulled out his notebook one last time. "What will you play next?" He wrote. She smiled. "Something new," she replied, "a duet." He raised his brows. With who? She reached out, tapped his chest lightly and smiled. With you. He laughed softly, feeling his chest warm. But you'll have to teach me your kind of music, he wrote. She nodded. It's easy. She scribbled back. You just have to stop listening with your ears. They walked back into the dimly lit music room later that night, their old piano waiting like an old friend. Lena sat down, placed her hands on the keys, and looked at him. He joined her, and together, they began to play, a soft, imperfect melody but full of warmth. He listened not just to the sound, but to her rhythm, her breath, her smile, and she felt every vibration of his notes through her fingertips. Their music became one heartbeat, one language. When they stopped, Lena wrote one last line on her notebook and showed it to him. You don't need ears to hear love. You just need a heart. Ethan smiled, whispering softly. Then I hear you loud and clear. The piano echoed softly one last time, a single lingering note hanging in the air as the lights dimmed. The world quieted, and in that silence and their music lived on forever.